The day is in the midst of a year-long look at affordable housing in the region. What specifically do you think the legislature should do to help people who can't afford to buy a home or are struggling to rent an apartment?
So, I've noticed that the housing lab stuff that you guys are running as well. There's a lot of really good info that is out there. Affordable housing is a tough one, especially because a lot of people, especially the people I've been talking to, going door to door, they've got this not in my backyard, and they're sort of willing to admit it that they're not interested in that. For us, the oral school is a big issue for trying to get some affordable housing in there, and people are really concerned about how it's being developed. So, but as a state legislator, as a state representative, there's that fairy horn, which I think is okay. It's the job of the state to sort of set some guidelines, and in some cases where municipalities aren't willing to allow affordable housing to really develop in their areas, to understand what the state really needs overall. And so for that, I want towns to be able to maintain their ability to zone, but maybe have the state limit the amount of funding that can go to municipalities unless they have some percentage of affordable housing as a baseline. So if your municipality wants additional funding from the state for town services, and you don't meet the minimum threshold for affordable housing, I think that strikes somewhat of a balance between the town's interest in maintaining its character and the state's need for affordable housing. So essentially, if you don't want to have affordable housing, you're going to have to pay for it. But I think in terms of individuals being able to afford homes, there had been talk of like a mansion tax. And I'm not necessarily for new taxes, but I think that programs that try to solve a problem should do so holistically. So if we were going to have a incentive program for individual home buyers, it should be funded by the sort of opposite end of that, right? So we have these huge developments or really large residential homes that are worth tons of money in some places, right? That eat up a lot of land and that are sort of exclusive. And if we're trying to solve the problem of regular people not being able to afford housing, then that's where we should be finding the solution, right? Cut it off the top and feed it to the bottom. So if we're gonna have a program, which I think we should, that allows individuals to more easily or affordably purchase their starter home, their forever home, whatever it is, the place they want to grow and raise their families, that a program like that should be funded on the high end by either a mansion tax or similarly taxes collected on the sales of those sort of extreme properties.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Connecticut recently enacted a law designed to provide safeguards against lawsuits for out-of-state patients seeking abortions in Connecticut and any provider who helps them. Yep. Do you support efforts to make Connecticut such a safe haven?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's already in place, right? So the real question would be, would I be for something that dismantled it, right? It's already there. I'm happy to. We don't need another law that does the same thing. But I support the idea that you should be able to come here and exercise your right as a woman to make that very difficult choice. If the broader question is, what's my stance on abortion, my thing has always been that it's a choice I'm never going to have to make. First off, but that even if I were, in some other world where I would have had to make that choice, I don't know that I would be able to. I just think it would be so difficult to do and so harrowing in terms of balancing your own interests. And it just seems like a very, very hard thing to even have to contemplate. And I'm very happy I don't have to do that. but because of that, first it's a woman's right. You got to be able to do it. And I think that 5414 does safeguard some of that right here in Connecticut. But beyond that, I want to avoid the choice in the first place as much as possible. So I want access to contraceptives. I want good sex education that's timely given, that allows for some conversation to be had with the parents as well. To me, maybe that's an opportunity to get parents and kids together to have those kind of conversations in a way that allows for the parents to understand what is being taught from a I'm not gonna say scientific. That sounds too clinical, too clean, because it's not really, right. But there's an opportunity to. I'm getting way ahead of myself. I would hate for anybody to have to make that choice. I really want it to be the last chance, but you're never going to prevent all unwanted pregnancies or all pregnancies that are going to have complications. So you got to protect the right, but you got to educate people as best as possible and give them other resources to avoid the choice in the first place. Because the weight of that, I can't imagine.
Okay, thank you. Next question. The state's surplus has grown to over $4 billion. Do you support the decision to use some of that to lower the state's pension debt, or do you think more should be returned to the taxpayer?
So it's not a decision to lower this. That's how the law is written, right? So because of the bond lock, right, after you get past 15%, it's got to go to the pension fund. And then that pension fund tops out as well. So one of the issues, I was about to go off on bond financing and why the pension needs to be dealt with. But could you clarify? Could you repeat the question? Yeah, I appreciate that.
The state's surplus has grown to over $4 billion. Do you support the decision to use some of that to lower the state's pension debt, or do you think more should be returned to the taxpayer?
Okay, understood. So that's where I was getting at. I have an issue with the question in that it's not really a decision other than by the legislature in previous sessions to have it go to the pension fund. I think that we can't simultaneously complain about all our unfunded liabilities and then after a system we put in place in 2017 with these rules in order to actually fund the unfunded pension liabilities, right? We can't throw up our hands and be like, oh, it's working. We should stop saving, right? We did this on purpose. And I think that the minority party has an interest actually in the debt accumulating because it's their sort of rallying cry. Republicans should be touting the fact that some of their concerns that they brought up when these rules were put in place are actually having an effect and actually reducing our debt load. But for some reason, we have a gubernatorial candidate who's like, no, we should be using that for other stuff. And it's like, no. We got to fix the problems we said we were going to fix in the first place. So, yes, I support the decision to fund the unfunded pension liabilities because that's what the law is.
Okay, thank you. Next question. How should Connecticut move forward to address climate change with regards to electric vehicles, wind power, and other clean energy strategies?
So, this is one of the things that I've been talking to a lot of people about on their doorsteps, right? It's this, what are we going to do? We got to do something, right? We live in the 41st, we live right on the water. And it is gorgeous, right? It is an unbelievable place to live. And so it's top of mind with most people that I'm talking to. And one of my major concerns is that if we want to go to intermittent sources, which is wind and solar, right, to have a grid that effectively utilizes those sources, you really need a strong integrated energy storage system applied to the grid. And right now, Pura has a 10-year goal, which is the Utilities Regulatory Authority, for 1,000 megawatts of storage integrated in the grid, with incentives for people to install their own systems in their homes and in their businesses. Bigger incentives for businesses than for homes, and there is some consideration for lower and middle income families. They have a little more of an incentive, but people in lower and middle income families don't have the kind of excess cash to invest in these kind of things, to put the storage in and integrate it into their living situations, right? So not only are there incentives for you to install systems, there's incentives for the performance of those systems once they're already installed, and that's just the rich getting richer overall. You're allowing, you're putting a system into place which we need for the entire grid, and incentivizing individuals who have the capital to install these systems to make the grid work better, which we're going to need some of that. And some people need it, not only need it, they want it for their own sort of off-grid lifestyles, right? They want to be able to install comprehensive systems so that they can create and store their own energy, which is great. But 1,000 megawatts over 10 years, the amount of administration, including the Green Bank and Pura and these incentives and tax bonuses to get these systems installed, is extremely layered with tons of administration. And Northfield, Massachusetts has a 1,143 megawatt storage facility on 300 acres. It's one facility. It serves the grid, right? We as Connecticut, as the people who live here, have to demand that our systems are robust enough on their own without relying on incentivizing individuals over people. And so I really think that we have to take a stronger stance in the way that we plan for a future grid that doesn't rely on fossil fuels. And that might include more nuclear. I spent 15 years building nuclear, basically fighting hotels, aircraft carriers and submarines, right, that are out there. I have a lot of faith in the technology, and I think that the public is sort of moving into more acceptance, and certainly us over here by by Millstone, it's well accepted that it's a safe practice, and we have this community of operators who come out of the Navy that really understand it, really know what the procedures are, really respect the potential dangers, and so two parts. We have to demand more grid storage that is funded and provided for the public, and we need to consider seriously expanding our nuclear footprint.
Okay, thank you. All right, next question. Do you think the 2020 election was conducted fairly and Joe Biden won? And as a second part of that, do you support early voting and voting by mail initiatives?
I am a cynic about a lot of things, almost everything, except for American democracy. The fact that we're even having this conversation, it hurts, right? It makes me nervous for the future of the world, because there's no reason to question the legitimacy of the 2020 election. I over and over and over again, no evidence was provided, and it hurts that's where we're at. Early voting, early in-person voting. I'm not sure how I feel about that. To be honest, I'm still thinking about it. I received the same question from the league, and also a Democratic pollster a few days ago, and I'd much rather have a state holiday. I'd much rather take Columbus Day and turn it into voting day, and get as many people out to the polls as possible. I definitely support mail-in voting in terms of what do they call it? No excuse mail-in voting, where you're just allowed to, if you want a mail-in ballot, you can have it. I don't see an issue with that. And if it gets more people engaged, engagement's the biggest thing. We really have to be paying better attention. And if we just pick sides, we're never going to hold anybody accountable. So I support mail-in voting. I'm on the fence about early in-person voting. It's more resources. It's a lot of times the schools have to shut down in order to allow for voting to happen, and that means another school day off or another half day, or that's where a lot of polling places are. So I don't see the benefit really. If you were going to miss voting day, get a mail-in ballot. And I am deeply concerned that there are those of us who think that the election was rigged or stolen, or it's gross.
Okay, thank you. All right, last question. Electric Boat is projected to see an influx of employees in coming years. What impact do you see that having on Groton and surrounding communities? And what would you do as a legislator to support your district during this time?
So I worked at Electric Boat for 10 years. And I heard a lot of stories of, the guys who managed to make it through the Seawolf sort of reduction and the Virginia coming back online. And I think that a lot of those projections about people coming into work, a lot of that's in Rhode Island. A lot of that is hiring for a force that is, quickly aging. There will be a great influx, but I don't know that it's going to be that it's going to have the kind of impact that some people are talking about, especially from what I've seen. I worked in the shipyard as a trades foreman, and most of my guys, they were commuting 30 or 40 minutes. I know, that's not really great either, but that's where they wanted to live, and that's where they were from, and that kind of thing. So. For the 41st, it does mean, probably some better just town and Groton City specific figuring out traffic. I think that affordable housing, as we already talked about, is going to be somewhat of an issue, particularly for young guys coming in. One thing that really struck me my last year I was there, people who were going through the training to be qualified to work in one of the trades, if they were doing so in Rhode Island, they were getting paid while doing it. If they were doing so for a job here in Groton, they were doing it on their own time and most often working another job at the same time. And that's not acceptable. If you're training these guys to do work specifically at one company, pay them. I mean, that's we can't accept that. And I get it. There's some risk in bringing on a new workforce, but these people live lives, and you're going to make them work 80 hours a week for 10 weeks while they learn the basics of a trade. I think that's unacceptable. So I think Electric Boat's point in not doing that was that Rhode Island was willing to give them as a state the money, and Connecticut was not. Part of the reason why the distinction. And I don't know that Connecticut should bend on that. I don't know that Connecticut should be providing those funds. But I do think that it's reprehensible that they treat people that way. It's a cycle, though. It expands and contracts. It will take some time. So I'm looking forward to it. They're great jobs, especially if somebody can have it for a career. And they're sort of unique, and getting more and more unique in the country now. And a union job with with good security, with decent pay. Those are tough to come by. So I'm glad it's happening, and it means that we're gonna have a more vibrant community in the next 10 years, which is encouraging.